Good morning, friends. Infection post any arthroplasty is a big challenge for the treating surgeon. It can be a devastating complication in which both patient as well as surgeon suffer. So let's look at what are the strategies for managing an infected hip replacement. I am Dr. Vaibhav Bagaria and I work at Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital in Mumbai. Infection pose a unique challenge because there are multiple definition, multiple tests, multiple management protocol, and there is little or no consensus in many of these aspects. However, there is a consensus, and in fact, a strong consensus that the prevention is better than the cure. And the prevention starts right from the pre-operative period and goes on to the post-operative period. And if you look at broad aspect of this prevention, it can be divided into the host factors, the bacterial load factor, and the wound issues. So in pre-operative period, it's very important to optimize the patient. During surgery, it is also important to restrict transfusions, and in post-operative period, it is important to maintain the immunity and the immune system of the patient. Similarly, there are many methods to reduce the viral and the bacterial load in the operating environment and also to treat any existing infection that the patient has. Wound care is also a very important part of this prevention, and the dressings, the way the wounds are closed, the handling of soft tissue, all play a very important role in this prevention. So in today's talk, we are going to see how we decide whether it's an infection, what are the different types of infection, or how do we classify the infection once it occurs. We'll discuss the appropriate strategy for eradication, and last but not least, we'll talk about what are the strategies for reconstruction. So how do we diagnose infections? So the infections are diagnosed on clinical suspicion, serology, the culture and the test that we do to grow the organism, the histology, and there are certain basic molecular technique and which are evolving over the last few years that play an important role in diagnosing these infections. If you look at this pyramid of the diagnosis, the very first step starts with a clinical suspicion. The most important blood investigation that follows this pyramid is the ESR and CRP, then the aspiration of the hip, and the other radiological techniques that may help us aid in diagnosing the infection. The Musculoskeletal Infection Society has put out a definition for periprosthetic infection, and it says that based on these on these criteria, a PGI exists when number one, if there is any sinus tract communicating with the prosthesis, or if there is a pathogen which is isolated by culture from two or more separate tissues or fluid sample obtained from the affected joint, or if the above two criteria is not maintained, then either four of the following six criteria, which means elevated serum ESR level, CRP level, elevated synovial WBC, elevated PMNs, presence of purulence in the affected joint, isolation of microorganism in one culture of the joint fluid, or more than 5 high power field neutrophils under 400 times magnification. There is a caveat that certain low grade infection may not fulfill all of these criteria. ESR and CRP are the commonest blood investigations that can be done, and ESR more than 30 and CRP more than 10 has shown to have more than 96% sensitivity and 59% specificity in diagnosing periprosthetic infection. An upcoming trend is to measure the synovial CRP, and if it is more than 3.6 milligram per deciliter, it is shown to have higher specificity. Continuing on to the other investigation, leukocyte esterase is an inexpensive and an instantaneous result providing investigation. in which the body fluid, typically in our case the joint fluid, is put onto the reagent, and if you see these two purple things which indicate a very strong possibility of infection can be found out. The test has a very high sensitivity and specificity. The caveat here again is that the fluid has to be pure fluid. It cannot be contaminated with blood, because if it is contaminated with the blood, the possibility of a false diagnosis is high. There are a few other biomarkers which have emerged to be a very highly sensitive and specific marker, and they include human alpha defensin, neutrophil elastase or ELA2, BPI, which stands for bactericidal permeability increasing protein, NAGALs, which are neutrophil gelatinase associated lipocalcin, and finally lactoferrin. The gold standard, however, remains culture. So whenever an intra-op culture is the best, and the recommendation is that a minimum of 3 to 5 sample should be taken in a separate sterile instrument. Why do we take 3 and why do we restrict to 5 or 6? Is that if you get more than two cultures showing the same organism, the possibility of it being contaminant is ruled out. Similarly, however, if you took too many samples, this criteria doesn't hold true. So it is most advisable to have 3 to 5 samples from different places of the operative site. How can we increase the yield of these cultures? One is to use a sterile broth containing Ballotini beads, which when shook increases the possibility of positive culture. It is also followed in some places that a sonication method which disrupts the bacterial biofilm can be used to culture the biofilms. So if you look here, that's the Ballotini plates, and this is the process of sonification. How do we go about managing this? And the management depends on the type of infection it is. And for a simplicity's sake, it depends on the timing of diagnosis. Tsukuyama in 1996 described it as type 1, 2, 3, 4 infection. The type 1 infections are the one in which you have taken a patient for revision surgery and you find a positive intraoperative culture. So the only treatment would be a prolonged administration of the antibiotics. The type 2 refers to a positive where the infection occurs within the first month of the surgery, and these are the cases where an attempt to salvage the processes with just a debridement and washout can be recommended. In the knees, it would mean a liner exchange. In the hips, it may reflect an exchange of the head and possibly a liner. Type 3 is an acute hematogenous infection. This happens in a previously well-functioning arthroplasty and secondary hematogenous seeding of such an arthroplasty. Again, in these cases, you can attempt a debridement with a salvage, or you can choose a one-stage exchange arthroplasty. Type 4, which is the most common type in our scenario, is a late or chronic infection. It follows a chronic indolent clinical course, and the infection is present for more than 1 month. Typically, these are the cases in which you should think about a 2-stage or an exchange arthroplasty. Now, different people, different surgeons have different way of approaching, and most of this decision depends on these 7 factors. 1, whether the infection he feels is superficial or deep. What's the duration of the symptom in relation to the index surgery? How does he feel that host immunocompetence, whether the host is immunocompetent or immunocompromised? What is the status of the soft tissue? What is the status of implant, whether it is loose or well fixed? And what's the offending microorganism? The key goal is to eradicate infection, prevent recurrence, restore function, and contain cost. So no matter what strategy you use, these are the key goals. And how do we achieve them? There are 4-pronged things that we need to do. 1 is chemically eradicate the infection. The 2 is physically eradicate. The 3rd is reconstruction, and 4th is optimization of the patient. This is more or less like what tumor surgeons would believe. So they'll give chemotherapy, they'll give a surgical option. In their case, they irradiate as well, and they reconstruct. So it's pretty much similar to that. So today, the strategy that we have is the irrigation and debridement with retention of existing processes, one-stage processes, two-stage with antibiotic spacer, and finally a salvage option in terms of arthrodesis or an excision arthroplasty. This is again an algorithm given by the same group, Parvizi et al. So if there is a periparasitic infection with a sinus tract or a post-operative time more than 4 weeks or an MRSA, all of this on your right side of your screen goes for a two-stage exchange. Whereas if none of these are present, then there is a dilemma, and that dilemma is whether it is cemented or it is uncemented. And uncemented more than 2 weeks are clubbed as a cemented totally. So these are the cases in which you will have to judge whether it is a loose component or a stable component. If it is a loose component, they go for a two-stage exchange, whereas if it is stable component, they can have a headliner exchange. Similarly, if it is a uncemented one, which is less than 2 weeks, IND with IV antibiotics for 6 weeks is recommended. Briefly, a single stage revision should be only considered if it's an acute onset symptom in an immunocompetent host with a well fixed component. You have an organism, and this is very important. If you have an organism with known sensitivity, only then should you embark on a single stage revision. And of course, you need to have an adequate soft tissue and bone stock. Although the rest of the four things are subjective, identifying organism is perhaps the most important thing. And you'll find enough evidence in literature. Endoclinic and Professor Girk does a lot of work on that subject. Physical elimination is the first step as a surgery, and you have to work like tumor surgeons. So there are often times when I actually call my tumor surgeon to debride this, and a typical sequence would be implant removal, cleaning the acetabulum, cleaning the capsule, synovium labrum, then turning your attention to canal. If it is a cemented thing, remove every piece of the cement. The second thing is to have a chemical elimination. Again, it's a multi-pronged approach. You give systemic antibiotics, you give copious irrigation and topical antiseptics. You give then you have to focus on increasing the availability of local antibiotics, which could be in the spacers or local drug delivery system, and more about that in upcoming slides. The systemic antibiotic will depend on the bacteria, and it is always good to have a antibiogram from your institute if you have not grown the organism in the culture. These are antibiotic spacers which increase the local concentration and also help preserve the soft tissue tension and makes a subsequent surgery easier. Some surgeons are concerned about their potential risk of fracture and redislocation, but in my opinion, if done well, these risks are perfectly manageable and in fact negligible. I think this is one of the game-changing thing that has happened in last couple of decades, and it's the availability of local antibiotic delivery system. The proprietary name is Stimulan, but there are various proprietary products available, and these can help achieve an MIC of more than 100 times what a systemic antibiotics can release. And I think these have been an absolute game changer in our war against infection. We'll have a separate talk on the reconstruction and revision surgery, but at this moment I'll only tell that remember that it's both bone and soft tissues. You cannot just focus on one thing and not on the other. You have to have both the things to kind of achieve a desired result. Abductor is very important, so is preserving the bone stock. I'll run through an illustrative case. This was a 32-year-old man, unfortunately had a left ICNF fracture for which CC screw fixation and a surgery was done, and then followed by THR, which was apparently well functioning for a period of 10 years. Then he developed a discharging sinus from last 3 months, which grew staph. Being an uncemented system, it was well fixed. We had to do an ETO to remove it. We put a spacer, got our culture report again, staph grew, sensitive to monoseph and clindamycin. We got the diabetes in the control. 3 months later, we got the blood work done. He was asymptomatic. The sinus tract had healed. The culture was the CRP/SR had come to normal. We got a CT done to evaluate the bone stock and the bone condition, and then this finally we revised this to solution processes. And you'll see that device there on the outside is a mini vac or a pico dressing, which I think is a great help again, once again in wound healing. So to conclude, the evidence for best practice is evolving. There's complex relationship between the organism, host, and implant. The key in war against infection is physical and chemical eradication. And finally, you have to give a good, stable reconstruction. In this war, there are certain things that we must be worry about, and be wary of, which is the pathogen virulence, which we have no control over, the bacterial biofilm, the fact that some of our patients may have received irregular antibiotic before cultures from their GPs. Sometimes we are ourselves cause of sampling errors and use of inappropriate culture methods. So many of these are avoidable. The pathogen virulence factor, of course, is not in our hand. And before I end, this is some food for thought. This is a very recent Journal of Arthroplasty article, February 2020, in which again the same group, Parvizi et al., who have got extensive experience in infection, questioned whether we have improved over time. And the sad truth was that he feels that they were unable to detect any substantial improvement in the treatment success rate of the periprosthetic joint infection in last 17 years. And there's a need to develop treatment and techniques which would improvise that. I thank you for your attention and welcome any question that you may have on this topic. Thank you, gentlemen. That's Mumbai. That's my hospital there, the Reliance Foundation Hospital, and that's the C-Link that we have connecting the suburbs and the downtown area. Thank you. Welcome any questions.